Now we'll stay on that issue for now. Following that liquidation of Heritage Bank, the central bank yesterday had to assure Nigerians that there are no plans to revoke bank licenses, other bank licenses in the country. Also, there was the story of First Bank having received the full repayment of 456 billion naira loan extended to Heritage Bank. And this was done before this liquidation. And troubles, a little bit of background now for Heritage Bank, started about 2019 when it faced severe distress and appeared on the verge of collapse. However, under the former administration of the central bank, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, the CBN pursued a policy of not allowing banks to fail, supporting Heritage Bank through various measures. That's where First Bank came into the picture. But now let's see what vibes this is sending to the banking industry at this time with financial expert Kelvin Emmanuel joins us from our Abuja studio. Hi, Kelvin. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me.
So a whole lot of, assumptions, consequences of this revocation of Heritage Bank is taking place. And, we've seen what is happening even to the banking stocks. It's gone that bad. But there's this story with the policy of the former CBN governor of not allowing banks to die, which is why we have First Bank coming into the picture, to help Heritage Bank. But at this time, it seems the current governor is facing another side. I wonder what financial experts are saying about these two different perspectives of the different governors of Central Bank of Nigeria.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having a very interesting topic. I think it's been a very long time since we've had this kind of situation with the banking sector. And I've heard quite a lot of views. Some people that have said that the government should immediately guarantee all depositors. The top 54 depositors in Heritage Bank hold 404.3 billion naira of the 650 billion naira in total that is held with the bank. The NDIC says that they've released a statement to say that anything of 5 million and below, they will immediately start payment to alternate accounts, and then above 5 million will be subject to liquidation and unwinding of the assets of Heritage Bank. But it's also very important to mention that Access Bank had asset and liability losses, mark-to-market losses of over 400 billion. And when you look at the shareholder capital at 53.9 billion, you look at the shareholder capital to deposit ratio, the shareholder capital is anywhere between 8.5 and 9% in terms of the gearing ratio, which is the shareholder to depositors funds held in the bank that is very poor. And it's one of the reasons, for example, why the central bank released recapitalization guidelines for banks to be able to improve their gearing ratio and improve the minimum capital that is placed with the central bank as an insurance against events like this. I don't quite agree with the thinking that banks should not be allowed to fail, because I am of the view that despite the fact that we need a very strong financial sector that is stable to drive economic growth, I'm of the view that we need fewer banks that are strong. In the US, for example, within the last 12 months, we've seen the Federal Reserve, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau supervise the acquisition of Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic Bank that failed to other banks. So the question was, despite the fact that First Bank in 2019, which is a GSIB, systematically important bank, because banks have classification based on their financial health, and based on their capital adequacy ratio. In Nigeria, for example, banks that have total capital over total risk-weighted assets at 15%, they are called Tier 1 banks. Banks that have total capital over total risk-weighted assets at 10% are called Tier 2 banks. And then you have the Tier 3 banks, and Heritage fell under the Tier 3 category. First Bank in 2019 as a bank of other banks that provides clearing services to other banks to enable settlement for interbank operations, provided a backstop in 2019 of 247 billion naira to Heritage Bank. And that was because in 2019, the immediate past governor of the central bank had issued a letter of comfort from the central bank to First Bank to provide that clear money, like a backstop for clearing services, so that interbank operations and settlements are not disrupted. So it's been a case of them managing a very bad situation for 5 years. The question is, why did the central bank allow the situation to continue for so long and not supervise the process for either another bank acquiring Heritage Bank and assuming all their assets and liabilities? So for me, in my opinion, despite all we've heard, I don't think the way to go is for the federal government to have AMCON, Asset Management Company of Nigeria, that currently holds about 5 trillion naira on its balance sheets in liabilities, to continue to soak up more debt, especially when you consider the situation we have in the economy today. AMCON is supposed to have been unwinded since 2011 based on the AMCON Act that says that it's not supposed to exist for more than 10 years. I don't think the situation is to have AMCON to come backstop Heritage Bank and prevent it from failing. I think it's a good thing that if the bank is not properly managed, it goes into liquidation, and the important thing is for the central bank to supervise the process to ensure that you don't have a situation where everybody is caught unawares and you wake up one morning and you see a circular from the Central Bank of Nigeria. In fact, personally, I've had a few friends who have come to me to say they have monies with Heritage Bank that is above 5 million naira. So, it's interesting to see how this is going to play out in the coming months.
Yeah, NDIC says for people of that category, burning more than 5 million naira, they will have to wait for the assets of Heritage Bank to be sold. And, of course, that puts a lot of depositors in that category in an uncomfortable place, because you don't understand how long the process is going to take. And, even the issue of verifying customers, which the NDIC has said, that also doesn't sit comfortably, with a lot of people, because, what will I need to do? How am I sure I will go through, even if I'm really a customer, a legal customer of Heritage Bank?
I have full confidence and faith in the work and activity of the Nigerian Deposit Insurance Corporation. There are always that institution that is behind the scene, and looking carefully and ensuring that the system is being run properly, in coordination with the Central Bank of Nigeria. I have full faith in them supervising the process of ensuring that funds are sent out to alternate accounts, first to depositors who have below 5 million, and then upon liquidation, to unwinding of the assets to depositors that have above 5 million. I mentioned that the top 54 depositors in the bank hold 404.3 billion naira in the bank. I don't have any doubt. And also, the rumor and fears about Unity Bank, Polaris, and I think a third bank, I think they're unfounded, because I don't think there is going to be any such situation where the central bank will have to revoke the licenses of these 3 other banks, as is being rumored in the public. When the CBN released recapitalization guidelines, I immediately stated that, listen, this is a season of mergers and acquisition. So other than the fact that Heritage Bank has failed and they've revoked their license, I see Tier 2 and Tier 1 banks swallowing Tier 3 banks going forward. At the end of the day, when the recapitalization is concluded, you're going to see a leaner banking sector, but a more strong and sound banking sector. I don't have any doubt in the faith and ability of the NDIC to do their work.
But, investors are not so comforted. That's why we saw what happened to the banking banking stocks yesterday. And even the CBN, of course, had to send that extra circular to say there are no plans to revoke any other license of any of the banks at this time. But how do we calm the nerve of investors, especially because the recapitalization is here, and you do need investors to, put their monies into these banks?
As a matter of fact, I think it's even the other way, and I'll tell you why it's the other way. Listen, the fact that Naira has dropped 92% in the last decade, right, owing from activities on ways and means, and the government drawing on central bank overdrafts without assets and reserves to back, and you've seen quantitative easing run a riot, you've seen inflation and the hike of MPR and all of that, has affected the asset quality of banks. 10 years ago, 50 billion naira, which is the minimum capital for a tier 1 bank in Nigeria, was anywhere around 350 million US dollars. Today, the same 50 billion naira is it's somewhere anywhere around $33 million. It's dropped. The asset quality of banks have dropped nearly 85 to 90% in line with the currency drop. So you need more healthy banks. I think it's a good signal for investors, because if you're asking investors to bring in money into Nigerian banks, you're asking an investor to bring in $1 billion. They're looking at the health of the banks. They're looking at the total capital over total risk-weighted assets. They're looking at the minimum capital, the gearing ratio, the shareholder capital to depositors funds. They're looking at all these metrics. So I think on the reverse, for institutional investors, it's the reverse of the fears that a bank being allowed to fail by the central bank, and the central bank, most importantly, supervising the process based on the act that governs the NDIC to ensure that there is no, fallout, and people are not, bitter, and it doesn't lead to outside losses, is good for the health of the financial system. Because if you allow a bank that had over 400 billion naira mark-to-market losses in the asset and liability management, and they have to borrow over 400 billion from another bank as a backstop to provide for clearing services for interbank operations, then you're basically saying that the CBN is saying that this bank is healthy and companies can go and do business with them, and then it might result in this kind of situation we have. So I don't share the perspective that, the CBN shouldn't have allowed it to fail, and the CBN should have provided a backstop. The CBN did provide a backstop in 2019 because they did provide a letter of comfort. Without that letter of comfort, First Bank wouldn't have pumped 247 billion naira for them to do clearing services. But it is what it is. Business sometimes goes well, business sometimes doesn't go well, especially depending on the management team of the bank. So there are many other banks in Nigeria that are in very sound health, and the fact that the CBN has released recapitalization guidelines to improve the gearing ratio and the minimum capital that the banks hold with the regulators is a good thing for this industry, and it's also very good for the financial sector.
All right, thank you so much. We hope our investors will run with that. We'll see what happens to the banking stocks at the close of trade today. Thank you so much, Kevin Emmanuel, financial expert.